Well, all right, friends. Let's yeah, at Northeast we'd play a chime is what we'd do, but we're good to go. Uh, and then we'll ignore the chime and then play it again a couple times to regather folks. Friends, great to be with you. Thanks for being here on our class on Leviticus. We have a fun set lined up for us. If you would like slides, they're on the corner, so you can scan there. There's a bunch of them, but also I can send you a link later, and you can get that too. We are recording this, and just to name that for us, we're recording it, and I can get a recording to you after as well, just to get some recap on this. And if you would like to not be in the recording, Washington law has me say I can take you out and not do that. So if you would like that, reach out to me, and I'll make sure that if your voice is there or anything, we'll remove it on the recording side. But let's open in prayer, and then we can dive into our class here. And God, thank you for the gift of this day. Thank you for this time to gather. Thank you for the way you are present with us in all the ways that we aim to encounter you. And as we encounter you through this book and through a reflection on your word, we pray you would come alive in us. Would you unearth things that you desire to unearth? And may we hear and receive that well. We pray this with Christ by the power of the Spirit. Amen and amen. So I want to start with these words on the screen, the book of Leviticus. We've done this before in different settings, but out of all of these words, do any of them resonate with the way you would think about the book of Leviticus? Have you ever said, this is strange, or this is confusing, or bloody, maybe legalistic, boring, repetitive, harsh, irrelevant, detailed, and uncomfortable? If so, would you slip up a hand? Anyone? Anyone? Yeah? Yeah. This book that does these kind of things, oftentimes, I believe, if you're anything like me, has made this reaction come out of my mouth, which, of course, the great American sitcom icon, Phil Dunphy from Modern Family, would say that is, why the face, of course, of course. So we have these questions, right? Like, this book is challenging for us to read. If you've tried to read a Bible reading plan and you've stopped somewhere in Leviticus, you are not alone. You're in good company. And so the question for us is, with all of that, we have these reactions, these questions to it. It's kind of whimsy, but I want us to go through 5 WTF questions today that will help us think about Leviticus in richer ways. Right, so the first question is, where's the friction? Right, like, where's the friction in the reaction that we have to it? And then the next one is, what's the form of Leviticus? What form does the book take? What form does the type of writing and that take in our lives? The next one is, what's the framework for this book? Why does it exist? What kind of framework does Leviticus shape on us? And then, what's the function? And then lastly, and probably most importantly for us, what's this form within us as readers? Right? So we can look at the form of the book, we can analyze it, but ultimately, what's it form within us as readers of the Word, and also as a community of faith that is engaging the Word? Right? So it's meaningful for us to name, like, this book is in our Bible. It's not like something we're supposed to just ignore. It's there on purpose. What is that purpose? What's that shape within us? Ultimately, what's that form? Some questions for us to reflect on. But I want us to start with this idea, like, where is the friction in the story? This image here is an etching from the 1500s of Leviticus 10. And it's the story of Nadab and Abihu. And it's these two priests, or sons of the high priest, and they're priests, and they come and they deliver strange or unauthorized fire. And it ends up that they are consumed by God, is what the text says. And as that happens, we're left with these questions. Aaron remains silent. And then we get here. There's friction. What do we do with a story like that? What do we do with that? I want to start with this as we look at this first question. Where's the friction? Why does Leviticus create resistance in us? And if you would, reflect on that question, and then let's share some answers. Like Leviticus, resistance. Where might that come from? Any thoughts, takers? Bill.
They're coming off of a 400-year history in subjugation to the Egyptians and their religion, their culture. And so, crying out loud, it would probably just be instinctual that they would take all those particular forms that were not of Yahweh.
Yeah. Bill's naming for us that they're coming out of 400 years round of enslavement, and as they're coming out, they're bringing with them baggage they need to wrestle with. Other thoughts? Resistance. Why does Leviticus create resistance in us? Other thoughts? Thane.
To me, it's just not knowing how to parse, the holiness laws versus like sexual laws versus like ritual stuff versus
Yep.
stuff that like Ten Commandments that we sort of hold as being really important, and it's not obvious to me. I think we often do say these ones we don't need to worry about anymore. These ones we do, but it's not obvious when they're sort of side by side how to parse them.
Yeah. How to parse out the laws or the words or the frames. Like if you're wearing mixed garment fabrics, right? Like, well, there's a prohibition in there, right? So yeah, how do we parse that out? That makes it hard. Yeah. It makes us maybe want to just be like, well, I'll throw most of it out then. We don't know what to do with it. Other thoughts? Yeah.
I think that for me, when I read all the rules, it kind of makes me feel again like, that insecurity, like, am I doing it right? Am
Yeah.
I doing Christianity right? Am I supposed to be doing something better or something more? And then become really super grateful for the grace of Jesus that covers all of that. So that's kind of what it makes me think of as, wow, it would have been tough.
Would have been tough to survive. She's saying it would have been tough to survive to live under that performance of having to live the faith that way. Yeah. Really tough. Vanessa.
For me, it's mostly just the putting people to death part. The main rub.
Yeah. And so there's two narratives in the book of Leviticus. Only two. And both of them are stories of execution. Everything else, there's speeches, there's teaching, there's rules and regulations, but the two stories we have in the book are stories of, again, Nadab and Abihu, and then later on it's called the blasphemer. And both of them lose their lives, or it says they're consumed by the fire of God. So yeah, what do we do with these stories? How do we read them faithfully? Yeah. Anyone else? Anyone have something burning within you? Yeah.
Just for modern times, I'm wondering for, it says no tattoos and like you don't eat pork, so that's very common these days, so I'm just curious.
Yeah, how do we make sense of things from an ancient world that now we live with without thinking, but there's some dissonance between that world and this world? And how do we make sense of that? Yeah. Like, do we eat seafood? Do we eat shrimp? Those things, right? Yeah, they come out. Well, as we think about friction, I want to name 5 types of friction that I think cover a lot of the types of tension we feel as we approach this. And the first one is cultural friction. It's this sense that Leviticus assumes a social, religious, and agricultural world that is structurally unfamiliar to us as modern readers. Like when we go to the grocery store and we think about meat, or we think about, I'm just going to pick something up for dinner, we don't have to plan all of the ways of like, how am I going to acquire and raise the animal or raise the grain or then mill the grain, like all the things that would be in the background of this world. They just go, oftentimes for us, unseen, or we take it for granted. And when we do take it for granted, some of the friction we receive is when we then read these regulations or these elements, we miss the type of gravitas that they have and they hold in society. Because for us, we can just blow by it. So I think there's cultural friction that we assume, not just with ingredients or things, but also social and religious context. The context that Leviticus is written to, the people it's written to, the context of what it means to worship a god in the ancient Near East, which is oftentimes accompanied with two things, anxiety and ambiguity. You don't know what the god wants. Like if I wanted to raise a harvest and have a good harvest coming up, then maybe I sacrifice to the God of rain, or I do something in that way. And if it works, great. But if it doesn't work, is that on me? Or did I choose the wrong God? Or did I do something, did I go to the wrong place? Did I have some secret sin in my life that made it so that didn't happen? Like those are questions you're wrestling with and you don't know. You only know after the fact. And then you get this book, Leviticus, that's written, and it is so detailed, and it offers a level of clarity. I think sometimes us as modern readers see the clarity, and we see restriction. Right? Like, why would they say, do this, 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 and don't do this? This is clean, this is unclean. Like, the distinguishing, that feels restrictive to us as modern people. And in that world, what they're hearing is like, there's clarity, finally. Like, someone has put it down on paper. Someone has told us. Someone is living life this way, and we trust this God. We trust this God. I mean, that's a flip in terms of how we think about completely the way Leviticus assumes religious and social agricultural world, the way religion is framed there, the way you approach God. So we have cultural friction. We also have aesthetic friction. This is like the way we experience things to be. It's graphic. This is a graphic book, right? Like there's the death scenes in it, but then also there's attention to blood and bodies and disease and death, sacrifice. Like it makes the realities behind our theological language sometimes difficult to avoid. So maybe we have friction with that as well. When it says things like you're going to put blood on the right toe of the priest and then the right thigh and the pointer or the hand and then on the forehead. Like for us, like I have no idea what that's about. But for them, there's this reliving of covenant life. And that's something that Leviticus is trying to frame for us. We'll get to it when we look at the framework, but Leviticus can't be read outside of the scope of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The whole creation story, over and over again, you can live the story of Leviticus and map it onto Genesis 1, 2, and 3. Like even the idea of let there be light, it's the same word for the luminaries in the temple, in the tabernacle, the same Hebrew word. So there's these ideas of like, when we see those, they're tied to specific custom that sometimes we can miss as modern readers. There's moral friction. Leviticus raises serious questions about power and gender, sexuality, disability, violence, exclusion that deserves honest attention without treating our first reaction as the final interpretation. I think the book is designed to elicit things within us, and then is also designed to make us sit with it. There's a Jewish interpretation of the way to engage the book of Leviticus that says it's designed on purpose to be impossible to live out perfectly, to prove that you can't live under any kind of system that's doing this. Like it's designed to do that, to show you sacrifice isn't what God actually wants for you. Like that's a powerful way to do it. Like it's overloading the system so that you actually will not pass it. You can't pass. And then you come to the realization, God is better than that. That's one way to read the whole book. But it raises these questions, moral friction. Two more, hermeneutical friction. That's just this idea of like how we interpret things. We often ask too quickly whether a law applies today before understanding some of the ways we read, like the background, the lenses we bring to it. It's a literary setting, covenantal audience, ritual purpose, its place in the biblical story. We'll look at that later when we look at framework, but this is another place where we get lost a little bit. We have pushback. The last one, too, theological friction. Leviticus can make God sometimes seem distant and demanding until we recognize that its instructions come from the God who has already drawn near and made communion possible. And this is where, again, when we're reading Leviticus, the beginning words start with God is already speaking to them in the tent. Now, sometimes when we've preached or taught on the book of Leviticus, it's about we do the thing to make God come close. But the whole book starts and is given in the setting that God is speaking from the middle of their community to them, telling them to come closer. Right, so you're not trying to do something to make God come close to you. He's already there. The first verse says he's there. The last verse is going to say, and he's going to go with you in the wilderness. The Leviticus starts with the voice of God speaks in the tent of meeting. And the next book, Numbers, starts with, now in the wilderness, the voice of God is speaking to them from the tent of meeting. It's like that voice has gone with them down the mountain into the wilderness as well. So either way, we can come sometimes with theological friction, things that rise up within us. So these types of friction can make it hard for us to engage. I want to think about this question, give some time for reflection and response. Which kinds of friction maybe feel most resonant for you? That's either cultural, aesthetic, moral, hermeneutical, or theological. And what question would you want to ask the writer of the book? If you could do anything. Let's take about 4 minutes and share with each other that kind of first teaching block of types of friction, type of questions we have. If you'd rather like to sit back and just reflect by yourself, that's also cool too. But if we know each other and you want to engage, let's engage with someone else for about 3 minutes, 4 minutes, and then I'll bring us back. So 3, 2, 1, and break. We'll take about 1.5 minutes. Friends, anyone want to share back? Any thoughts, reflections? What came out as you were engaging?
I was reflecting that the moral friction feels the most resonant to me because it's what I feel like I hear about the most as I talk with friends or folks that are like, skeptical of the local church or of
Yeah.
Christianity. They're like, why on earth? Like, I don't want to be a part of a faith that says any, and Leviticus is often referenced.
Yep.
And so I would want to ask the book, the author, kind of like, why was there not like an easier way to talk through some of these things? Or
Yeah.
like a less, just a more accessible, could there have been a more accessible way to explain some of the nuances of the laws? I don't know, yeah.
Yeah. No, great reflection. Great question too. That I know pastorally, those are questions I have or conversations I have with folks. Yeah. Others? Other thoughts?
The cultural friction for me really resonates in my fundamentalist past, and they readily endorsed or embraced Leviticus.
Yeah.
It's just something that was mandated and dictated, but squeezed out the grace that supposedly was found in Christ. And it took a long time to parse out for myself. So yeah, cultural friction and how it still affects us today in terms of our social, political outpouring. Yeah, big deal.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill. Well, from this place of friction, I want to name that when we're reading a hard book like this, one that's difficult to understand, friction is not necessarily the enemy of faithful reading. I would name that unexamined assumptions are. Like to feel friction, to have that arise in you is not a sign that you're unfaithful. Like faithful reading does not begin by pretending the text feels easier than it does. And like we are engaging a hard book. There's a reason why this book oftentimes isn't preached on at all. And yet we've done a series on it, which is great, super fun. But like to do that, I want to name that we can understand that friction question when we start to look at the form. And it starts to unpack a little bit of why that friction that we have might have more places to go. And so what's the form of this book? Right here is Mount Sinai. It's the south side of it. It's a significant mountain in the history of Israel. We're actually in a series now on mountains. And from this preaching series, like we're going to look at this pivotal mountain in the history. The formation of Leviticus and Mount Sinai, they go hand in hand. Right? Like Leviticus names Sinai in its opening section and then returns to it in its final verse. So it names for us, hey, this book is happening in this important place in a people's history, and not just in a people's history, it's important in the landscape of how God has chosen to show God's self in the world in the ancient Near East. Right? So you have this sense that as that's happening, the mountain kind of shades everything through the lens of covenantal instruction. Covenantal instruction. Now, what's that mean? Like, the Ten Commandments are given on Mount Sinai. You have this sense of like God making a covenant with the people to say, I'm going to be with you in a certain way. And also, I invite you to join me in life in this way. And then not just to stay on the mountain, but to come down the mountain into life with others as my people. Like, the covenant here in Sinai is all over this book in Leviticus. And so here's just those verses, right? Like it closes the first section with which the Lord gave Moses at Mount Sinai in the desert of Sinai. And the whole book closes with this happens again at Mount Sinai for the Israelites. These are the commandments given from the Lord. I'll name for us, Sinai is not only where Israel receives truths to believe. These are the 10 Commandment passages, because they do get them there. But also, Sinai is where Israel receives instructions and practices through which covenant life will take an embodied form in them. Right? So that's kind of what Leviticus is doing. It's saying, on the mountain, you will get these 10 words, these 10 truths. And you know what else you're going to get? You're going to get practices and embodied ways of living that bring this covenantal life that those 10 words point to bear in your life and in the lives of those that you encounter. So the same God who gives the 10 commandments also gives the instructions concerning all these things, like sacrifices, priests, food, bodies, cleansing, neighbor love, festivals, fields, economics, Sabbath, and Jubilee, the idea of rest, personal and also corporate. It's all there. And on this mountain, again, these are practices through which covenant life will take embodied form. So even there, just thinking about the book of Leviticus as saying, if we've gotten the 10 commandments already, and now we get to this book that's giving a more detailed roadmap of how to live this covenant life that those 10 words are pointing to in the first place, that helps us understand a bit more of like the distinction, what this book is trying to do with us. And yet we still get to like these chapters where this is a Baptist artist who goes through and tries to essentially sketch out their depiction of the main point of each chapter for the entire Bible. They have a ton of different things, but this is what they brought up in Leviticus. And there's a sense like unclean, unclean. You have all these like marks, right? Like not that, not that, not that, not that. You have these moments that are sketched out. And this is what they're gleaning as they're creating an artistic representation of it. Again, what do we do with the friction when we encounter a book like that? Is this the only way to read it? I'll name this. Leviticus is law, but it is not law in precisely the way we modern people usually imagine law to be. So here's how we oftentimes think. If we hear law, we imagine this. Modern law takes this form. It says like what's permitted, what's prohibited, what is the punishment or the penalty for breaking the law, and then how is the rule enforced? How is this law enforced? Leviticus sometimes will address these type of questions, but it doesn't always operate in law in the same way. It also asks these questions. How does Israel approach God? How does Israel perceive creation? How do people distinguish between categories, between things? How should bodies and food and time and work and land be received? How does a liberated people become recognizable as belonging to God is a key question. And Leviticus does not merely regulate Israel's behavior, it's trying to train the people's perception. Right? It's trying to train the people's perception. So not everything that you will encounter in your life will be showing up in the book of Leviticus. And yet, it's training the folks to live a certain kind of way, right, towards a certain end. And that's where this idea is going to start to take shape. So with the form, I know this is an egregious quote. It's like everything you shouldn't do on PowerPoint is put this many words there, but it's there. I'm going to read this for us, and I'm going to unpack it for us. Mary Douglas wrote this book, Leviticus as Literature. It is one of the key books that biblical scholars look to for how to engage the way Leviticus is written and why it engages us. I'll fly through this for us. Leviticus's literary style is correlative. It works through analogies. Instead of explaining why an instruction has been given, or even what it means, it adds another similar instruction, and then another, thus producing its highly schematized effect. Like the way that it works is just by giving you things over and over and over again. If one asks, why this rule? The answer is that it conforms to that other rule. If why both of these rules? The answer is a larger category of rules in which they are embedded. In Leviticus, the patterning of oppositions and inclusions, generally, all the explaining that we are going to get are there. Instead of arguments, there is just analogy. Right? There's analogy. Now, what's that mean for us? Here's what that means. For us, modern readers often expect things to look like this. There's a claim, and then there's explanation, and then there's evidence, and then there's conclusion. That's how we think. When we see law, that's what law is. Right? So we know what the law is, we explain it, we get the evidence for it, then we find the conclusion for it. So here is the command. Here's why it exists. Here is the principle behind it. Here is how to apply it. That's what we think of when we think of law. But in Leviticus, things are different. It oftentimes communicates like this. You get instruction, and then you get a similar instruction, and then you get a contrast, and then you might get another instruction and another similar instruction and contrast. It repeats and it repeats and repeats. And then finally you get a pattern when you zoom out enough and you see it. And that's how the book of Leviticus is training us. Right? So like the accumulated pattern is part of the explanation. Like the rules and instructions begin to interpret one another. Now, I know that feels like a lot. Let's parse it out. I got you. The way that these Leviticus works in these kind of patterns of relationships typically are like this. You have holy and common, you have clean and unclean, life and death, inside, outside, priest, worshiper, sanctuary, land, approach, removal. You have work, not work, or Sabbath, and then you have receiving and returning. You have these pairs all through the book of Leviticus of how the rules and regulations and the rituals are trying to get you to think about something. And this gives us this idea, right? We don't want to interpret one rule in Leviticus before noticing the pattern of rules around it. This is key for us as we read the book of Leviticus. An individual instruction may appear arbitrary when it's isolated, but its function becomes clearer when we ask these questions. So what comes before it? What comes after it? What does it make me think of, or what does it resemble? And then what does it contrast? And that tells us what larger category contains it. Okay, so this will be a little different for us in terms of how we think of law. It's pretty technical, I know, but we got some examples we got here. So we have these two stories, right? In the narratives, you have Leviticus 9, then you have Leviticus 10. One of the narratives here in the book. And God sends fire in Leviticus 9. The fire consumes the offering. God's glory appears. The people shout for joy. The people fall face down. And then fire consumes the communion or the altar, right? The things that are there. And it says like the glory of God is all around. It's all there. The people are brought up into that. And then the very next story, you have another story about fire. But this time, it's two sons of the priests. They're priests themselves. But they bring strange fire, unauthorized fire. And we don't know what that word really means. It just says strange or unauthorized. We don't know why it is. But then you have this sense, like fire comes from God again, and that fire now consumes the priests. Aaron remains silent. Fire brings judgment and grief. And you have this story comes out with two things. And the text does not completely explain what made the second fire unauthorized. Was it the wrong type of coals or the wrong incense? Was it the wrong time, the wrong place? There is a case to say it was like there was intoxication maybe when they brought it. Is it a combination of any of these things? Like the text doesn't give us enough information. Instead, it just gives us the contrast. It just pairs it. And that pairing is meant to make us think this. In one scene, fire is given by God and received by the people. In the other, the priests bring fire, contrary to God's command. Same type of fire, but it's a different posture. And now you see holy fire is meant to be received as a gift. It's never ours to control. Just like law is meant to be received as a gift. It's never ours that we're meant to control and then throw and thrust onto others. Right? The contrast performs the explanation of the story. Now, if you just read one of those, either way, it brings to us this sense of like, who is this God? And also, this doesn't just answer all the questions, but it does raise to mind, like, this is the way Leviticus is trying to pattern things for us. It's trying to pattern things. So, I'm going to break us. Let's do this. We have 3 sections. We go to Leviticus 11, and we're going to look at how does Leviticus teach, right, this form. I want you to read these assigned verses, and then look for the pattern that's present in the text. Let's go group 1 here, group 2, and then group 3. Good? And we'll take about 5 minutes. Take some time. What is this pattern or passage training Israel to notice? Yeah. All right, friends. What do we think? What was that, Kelly? Yeah, really? Yeah. The, yes. So how does Leviticus teach? Here's an example, right? What do we come up with? Any revelations or thoughts about how to make sense of your passage?
Our passage is about what's acceptable to eat and what's not acceptable to eat.
Yeah.
And in the last, verse 47, it says, you must distinguish between the unclean and the clean, between living creatures that may be eaten and those that may not be eaten. So that's what it's training him to do. Our only confusion was, at first it says that you can't eat things that move along the ground. We're like, oh yeah, snakes and lizards, that would be, easy. But then it says, creatures with 4 feet. So we're like, cows and sheep. So we were a little confused there, but the point of that is just they're supposed to be discerning
Discerning.
what's not.
Yeah, there's some kind of discernment, distinguishing happening. Notice they got the end of it, right? The last verse is going to be the thing in this chapter that covers up like all of these categories are meant to do what? Last verse. Help you distinguish between different things, clean, unclean. Now, like we'll name even there, clean, unclean isn't necessarily good or bad. It's like ritually existing in a different category. But we'll name that. For y'all, any thoughts in terms of how that parsed out for you?
I think one of our questions was, as we're looking at the bigger picture, because we can build off of what Linda read already, is it that we need to bring every decision to the Lord?
Hmm.
Like, you don't, like Amy was saying, like, there's all these things in front of you that you could eat, and like, and this is the thing that we need to, with discernment, go to the Lord and say, what do you have for me, and what do you not have? I don't have to understand what a Pythrax is or whatever.
Right, right.
I just know I can't eat it because I'm going to trust that the Lord is guiding me in all aspects of life.
Yeah.
Again, stretch.
One of the things I came up with was that that's why we bless our food too before we eat it.
That there's a blessing, yeah. Yeah, that you live into that pattern in some way. Like it's a carry forward of saying grace or saying blessing over it. Yeah.
So in our section, it was 4 verses, but the restriction of aquatic that's unclean is if it has fin, if it has, it must have both
Yeah.
a fin and a scale, or fins and scales.
Right. So like read in isolation, it's going to be hard to make sense of that at all. Like what do we do with that? Even not read in isolation, it'll still be hard to make sense of, right? But those questions, like this, what this passage is training the people to notice is what distinctions or categories does the passage establish? What words, phrases are repeated? If we read through the passage a bunch of different times, you would come to see certain phrases repeated. What does the text explain? Why each creature belongs in this category? Or does it? I don't think it does. It just gives you these things. And then what habit or instinct might this repetition be forming? Again, we got the end of the chapter that says, this is what this practice of you discerning is meant to do. Right? To be a person who makes discernment around the world. So you have the instruction, the example, the contrast, the repetition, the pattern. And what that ends up looking like, well, too far. Leviticus does not explain every creature individually. It just places another one beside it, and then another one, and another one, until you get to the sense of like, here's the payoff. Here's why this is happening. So, example, land animals may be eaten when they both have a divided hoof and chew the cud. Okay. So, camels, no, because it only does one of these things. Same with hyaks or hares or pigs, right? Each is declared unclean. But then, through the scope of the whole chapter, like zoom out a little bit, So it starts with land animals, and then it goes to aquatic creatures, and then it goes to birds, and then insects, and then creatures that move along the ground. And then within each realm, distinctions are made between creatures Israel may eat and may not eat. And then you get this sort of repetition. If you read the whole chapter, you'll have unclean for you, detestable for you. Whoever touches their carcasses will be unclean. And then this line comes up over and over in the chapter. You must distinguish between the unclean and the clean. And by the end, the accumulated instructions reveal this larger purpose. This is this last verse. You must distinguish between the unclean, living creatures that may be eaten, those that may not. Now we might say, well, why? And then you zoom out again and say, well, what does chapter 11 fit? Like, where does that fit within the scope of this whole book? And you're gonna go through the next 7 chapters of the book saying, you're supposed to be a type of people who can make decisions and distinguish between different things. And here's one example, what you eat. But here's another example. The next chapter is going to be about different things, and it's going to go through the same type of order to train the folks in a particular way. So again, one example is placed alongside another until a larger thing becomes visible, and it repeats the contrasts, so until Israel learns the larger practice of distinction. Well, that's kind of how this section of Leviticus works. And one of the ways that it's trying to communicate things is through repetition patterns and making you live through the thing. Like, it would be really nice to be like, yeah, why the hyrax? Like, what is that about? What is the actual reason for it? And the answer we're going to get is like, well, then you also can't do this animal. And you can't do that one too. Okay, what is this meant to do? It makes us ask these questions. Like, what do we do with this? How do we make sense of this thing? Is that patterning making sense for us in terms of like how the book is formed and how it's functioning? Thane.
Patterns, thinking about people that are familiar with Pentateuch, right? And thinking about Genesis. So Genesis, you have those 3 worlds too. You have like
Yep.
God creates these 3 spaces, and then God fills all the spaces, 3 spaces. You know, He fills them with life, the heavens, the land, and the water, and then says that they're all good.
Yep.
So it's all good, but then how do you understand? Like when we get to here, it's like, well, it's all good, but kind of kind of no.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm just curious how you like. How do you understand the larger question of needing to distinguish? I mean, there's the distinguishing Israel from all the surrounding nations is a big thing. But like, how do you think about that?
So I think,
It's all good, but then
yeah. So Peter Leithart is an American theologian, does a lot of stuff with Leviticus. And one of the things I think that's really compelling in his work is he makes that connection of the book of Leviticus is essentially living out the distinctions and the work of training folks to make distinctions that was in Genesis, but they failed to live into well, right? And so, like, if you can't do good and evil and knowledge of good and evil, that whole tree thing well, then let's start with something that the stakes aren't as high, right?
Intention of Silas is that they didn't have training yet. They knew something general that was good, and Dean mentioned that, but they didn't have training, and that's the hard part for me, just because of the fact you don't have the training, you're going to be
That is a tension with it, right? That's one of the really tough tensions in the text. And that, for me, then it becomes this question of like, what does it mean to be consumed? How do we read even history in that vein? Which can go a whole bunch of different directions. But I think it's a question worth asking. Yeah. And yeah, the thing to your question, like where Leithart would go is to say, Leviticus and things after the fall are making us start lower stakes, lower level, like with what you wear, because they already clothed themselves, right? Like they got fig leaves and clothed themselves. And then in some of Jewish tradition, they'd say the first sacrifice was actually God killing animals to then put skins onto the people. Where there's a sense like that's meant to give you something to cover and take away the things that you put on yourself, to give you a better version of that. If we skip Leviticus, we may recognize the vocabulary of, or we may recognize the vocabulary, but miss much of the world of meaning that happens all through the Bible. So like a fundamental question for us is, we just went through this whole way of reading it, this pattern thing, that feels kind of hard and convoluted to do and requires like a digging in and all that. What if we just didn't do Leviticus? Why do it at all? Well, this question, if we skip it, we're not going to recognize much of the meaning of words that come up in other places. Like this is a foundational place in the Bible. It gives the Bible part of its symbolic grammar. Like the whole book of Hebrews doesn't make sense without Leviticus. So much of the New Testament won't have the grounding without not just the Old Testament, but specifically Leviticus. Also, the commands and the commands and exhortations to treat your neighbor justly, those don't exist without the book of Leviticus. And so you have this thing of saying it's not just sacrifice. It's like the actual commands to go love your neighbor. Don't glean everything. Leave margin. That's here in this book. So again, we continue to do it. Our next question, what's the framework? And this will help us get to that question of like where Leviticus sits within the Torah or the Pentateuch. If you ever hear those words like Torah, Pentateuch, it's just the first 5 books of the Bible. Pentateuch is Greek, Torah is Hebrew. There are different ways of talking about it, but those first 5 books there. If you look here at this sense, again, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, you have the center being the emphasis. And then within Leviticus, it's patterned in this way. This section up here, and then you have this being the center of the law. And in Hebraic writing, that's called a chiastic structure. Like the thing that's in the middle is the emphasis. So like if you think of a movie for us Western folk, like the climax comes after a long build. You get there, then you have maybe a short down ramp for resolution. As they're writing and engaging the world, the thing that's the center, the climax of their story, is the very middle of it. And then you have maybe something that patterns the first part going down. So it's important for us to recognize, this is from a book called Who Shall Ascend the Mountain of the Lord by Michael Morales. It's like one of the premier biblical scholar books on here. Highly recommended if you're trying to get more like the pattern things and also what other people have said. But this framework here, at the literary center of Torah is a book about dwelling with God. And then at the center of that book is God making a way for communion to continue. Right, take a look back. At the very center of the first 5 books is this book about communion with God. And then you have this practice, the Day of Atonement, is the very center of that book. So double emphasis. I also want to name this, that here in our journey, right, like all of Leviticus happens on Mount Sinai in this place. And if you think about like the book of Exodus covers such a wide time frame. And now from essentially Exodus 18 to Numbers 10, it's just the time that you've been on the mountain, engaging with God, receiving the law, receiving this book about how to live and engage the world around you before you go back to the wilderness. Israel arrives at Sinai in Exodus 19, and Israel does not leave till Numbers 10. That means everything in Exodus 19 through Numbers belongs in what's known as the extended Sinai narrative. What's that mean, right? The very first book, or the very first verse of Leviticus starts to name that for us. The Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. Like, why does this framework matter? Because God is already there with them, speaking to them. The central question of Leviticus is not how do we get God to show up. Right? It's not do all of these things in the book of Leviticus so then God comes near to you. God is already there. And as God is already there, before God teaches Israel how to next go into Numbers and walk through the wilderness, God teaches Israel how to live with the God who's already there, who wants to be with you, to live in God's presence. And this is where this is key for us. Like, you cannot sustain a wilderness faith in Numbers without learning ordinary holiness in every decision of your life. And that's what Leviticus is trying to do in this book. So this journey for us is important to recognize the framework of this book. What's the framework? It's trying to help them recognize the God who's already close to them. And the Day of Atonement is that centerpiece, right? This day where you make restitution, you clean house. I've used the example of like a house fire. When your house is on fire, you have to clean the house. You also have to remove debris. There are two steps, right? If you just remove things, but you never cleaned the house after things were removed, you still can't live there. And if you cleaned it, but then you left everything that was burned or consumed in there, it's not going to make much of a difference. So you have to do both things. And that's kind of what the Day of Atonement's doing. There's two steps. There's two goats. There's one that is killed and the blood is shed for the cleansing of the space. And then there's another goat that's sent away that's liturgically and symbolically carrying the sin of the people into the wilderness. And it doesn't say it's to die. It just says it's sent away into the wilderness away from the camp. And so there is a whole side of like Jewish lore that says in Messianic Jewish lore that says when Jesus goes to the wilderness, he goes to be with the scapegoats that haven't died yet. And he goes out there. His first step is there, and then he gets the rest of his ministry. After he's redeemed the thing that everyone has sent away that has been the most unredeemable thing. Whoa. Leviticus. Great. We did it. Leviticus is not a detour from Israel's liberation. It is where liberated people learn what freedom with God looks like. Or they've just been liberated from slavery. They're learning what it means to be a people who can live in that freedom. I mean, one of the keys in Genesis, or one of the keys as they're leaving Egypt, they've finally left, and then it says, the text says, God's going to take them the long way around so that they don't see war. Because if they see war, they're going to turn back and go to Egypt. And you know what the next verse says? So all of Israel armed themselves for battle and prepared themselves for war. That's what the next verse says. So it's like, God, you just said you're going to take them the long way so they don't see war. And it's like you didn't tell them because they still armed themselves for battle. But where do they go? They go through the wilderness. They go around. It's like you see this intent there of that happening. With the idea of, I just want to take a pause because that was a pretty technical section. We did quite a bit there. We went through a lot of things. Take a breath. And any questions or things that need clarification from where we just were? We threw. Yeah, the pyramid here. Yeah.
Those stories that Vanessa was asking about, like 10 on the left, that was about the priest, right?
Yep.
And he died, and was the other one priest on this one?
It's called the blasphemer in the story. And so we're like, is it a priest? Is it not? Is it someone with proximity? The title suggests that, but it doesn't just leave it there. Yeah.
And then for me, it's like, I'm so curious what the Jew, if we were at a synagogue, what they would be saying about this, like,
Yeah.
which is probably the extra credit. But I'm like, well, who are my friends that are halal only, right? That's a subset of the Jewish kosher. Like, they follow some of this, which is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, the Hallel interpretation for sure. Yeah. I mean, I would name the Day of Atonement is the most important day for them, right? Yeah. Yom Kippur. Thane?
I recently was listening to a podcast where they were talking about chiastic structures, and they were saying that it also maps onto pedagogy being different in like in our time and space versus like in Near Eastern.
Yeah.
And they're saying like now for us now like a good teacher lays it out and kind of tells you what you need to know. Like that's not the stereotype, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas like in Near Eastern teaching, a good teacher would like set things up so that you have to discover what the middle, like the treasure's buried in the middle.
Yeah.
And so it's like so that way you kind of if you can kind of figure out the middle, the middle's the Day of Atonement, then you have this like it sticks in a way that nothing else would ever stick. And then we're like, no, just tell me what I need to know.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, you need to actually keep grappling with it until you get to the heart of it or something. But I thought that was interesting that it's mapped out.
It's a different pedagogy for sure. And that's where, even just making distinction, like when we see the word law, and this is a book of law, we imagine, oh, it's law like we imagine modern Western law to be. It's not written that way. It's in different context. I mean, another example of this distinction in pedagogy, the U.S. Soccer Federation right now is concerned with the way that the men's World Cup team performed and what that means for grassroots soccer. And so there's this whole move to say, like, we need to make our players make more decisions as they're training and follow less directions. And the pedagogy there is like, you learn by making decisions and by finding success or by failing. So the coaching has to set you up to have to make decisions rather than follow directions. But you get a lot better results at the short term, especially it's like U9, U12, when you can tell, hey, kick the ball here, attack that player, do this thing, when you can direct it. But there's a cliff where like that just stops working. And we do the same thing with faith. Like sometimes we want the direction, feel like, God, just tell me what to do. And then we'll run to a place where like the decision, life happens, you don't know what to do, and there's no direction. And then how do I live? Right? Like the book is designed to make you have to make decisions and to do the distinguishing in the middle of the Torah, the law, so that you can go live the rest of the law well when you go down the mountain and have to live in the wilderness again. Right? Part of how it's designed.
But the assumption here is that we have to have that experiential experience, that we can then precede. And sometimes that gets a little tricky. Maybe we just are satisfied with opening our mouths and just consuming the data and hope that it's something that'll stick of relevance. And yeah, so I think it really, for me, I love that process, that confusion of you had to make a decision in the moment to keep the ball here, there, and figure out what the consequences are. But if you don't do that, you really can't proceed forward with any kind of help.
Yeah, you're reliant on the one who tells you the directions, right? Yeah. Well, good. Any more comments before we move on? We have 2 more questions, 2 more WTFs to go to. Good? Okay. What's the function? What's the function of Leviticus and this book? The function of Leviticus is to make and sustain communion between a holy God and a people living in the ordinary world. I've named at Northeast a bunch of times. Like, Leviticus is weird, but it's not random. And at its core, the heart of Leviticus is trying to figure out how a holy God can live with a people who are being called to be holy people. At its core, that's what the book is trying to do. Oh, here we are. This thing, yes. So before Leviticus, God has already liberated Israel and entered covenant with Israel, descended at Sinai, moved into the tabernacle, chosen to dwell in the middle of the people. And again, in the ancient world, worship was often accompanied by anxiety and ambiguity with how you relate to God. Leviticus gives this sense of clarity. God speaks and God calls and gives instruction, and God makes a way for the people to be. God makes a way for God revealing God's self amongst the people. And you get these categories through the book that are kind of clarified. So you have sacrifice, and then priesthood, purity, atonement, and holiness. These big categories that play out in different ways. As we go through those real quick, sacrifice responds to presence. It doesn't produce presence. I think that's key for how we want to think about sacrifice in the book of Leviticus. It responds to the presence of God. It's a giving back to in response to God. It doesn't make God show up. That's the key distinction we want to make in the book of Leviticus, right? And even the way, when we talked about the pattern of the sacrifices we just think they're all the same. But they're not. And in fact, the sacrifices themselves build towards the ultimate one that is known as the peace offering, the fellowship offering. It's called two different things in the book. But the peace offering reveals where the sacrificial movement is headed. Right? So like the very first sacrifice you get in Leviticus is one that's given completely to God, and everything is burned up and everything disappears. And the priests never get any of it, and the person offering it never gets any of it. But then keep following the sacrifices. And the one that is towards the end is the peace offering. And the part is offered to God, part belongs to the priest, and then more than what one person can possibly consume without refrigeration as well. You could never store it. You can't do anything with it other than share it, or else it goes to waste. And then it's commanded. Part of the meal is for the worshiper to offer that to others. And this is where like the altar you sacrifice on is not the end point of what sacrifice is meant to be. It's the thing that prepares the table. And the peace offering is the centerpiece of where the sacrificial system is meant to go. So let's say priesthood. This is another category that's clarified in here. The priesthood stewards communion. Like priests do not own God's presence, they steward God's nearness. And that's their goal, that's their function. The closer we stand to sacred responsibility, the more dangerous it can become to mistake stewardship for ownership at times. But as we look at priesthood, this is what they're doing. Right? They're trying to bring and maintain the pathway for God's holiness to be present. Also, purity protects communion. Want to name, again, unclean does not mean sinful, and clean does not mean morally superior. There's just a different category for how it's talking about. We could dive into that because there's a bunch of different words they use in Leviticus, but I think that's a discussion to have. Purity does not deny embodied life. It orders embodied life around sacred presence. There's two more things that come out for categories here. Atonement restores communion. Again, that first goat is sent away or is cleansing, and the second one is the living goat sent for the removal of sins. God does not remove the people from the divine presence. God removes what threatens communion. Like as that goat is sent away, God doesn't send the people away and say, get away from me until you're clean so that you can come back and then be with me. He says, let's send the sin on this thing into wilderness away from you so I can stay here with you. Right? The function of atonement is therefore larger than avoiding punishment. Atonement restores the conditions of communion. Again, in the book of Leviticus, sin is more often than not understood as ruptured relationship. It's not transgressing a law. Again, this is where for us legally, we think, what does it mean to be sinful or to fall into that as Western folks? We have the law or the decree. We transgress it. God brings us back over on the other side of the ledger, and our name is clear. Has a much more therapeutic and relational sense of what sin is. Sin is something that ruptures relationship with your neighbor, which is why the peace offering is the one that the sacrifices are going towards. It's the one offering that's given back to you where I then have to share relationship with the person I've wronged. That's why it's peace. And then that's also why it's fellowship. And that's what God gives back to you when you have wronged someone. He doesn't just say, like, clear your conscience. Let me give you something that then forces you to go back to the person you've wronged and share that with them. Because you can't possibly eat all of it by yourself. But that's a gift. That's crazy. Like, what is this? This is God. God does not remove the people from the divine presence. God removes what threatens communion, and atonement restores conditions for communion. And then holiness extends communion into ordinary life. So after Leviticus 16, that's the Day of Atonement. In Leviticus 19, communion with God becomes gleaning left for the poor, wages paid promptly, disability protected from exploitation, justice administered impartially, speech governed by truth. You have vengeance being refused, and also neighbor and foreigners, they're loved. Like, this is commanded here. This is what it means to take that Day of Atonement life, the holiness of God, and live it in your ordinary life. Pretty remarkable. This is where I think we can think about Leviticus like this. It's the architecture of communion. Right, the story begins. God has come near to you. God provides a way for you to then approach. God orders and protects shared life, restores what sin and death disrupts, what it ruptures, and it extends holy presence into the life of the people and the land. And this is what the book's rituals, categories, and commands are trying to do. It's trying to do this work. The architecture of communion. So the last question here, what's this form? What's this form within us as readers, as people of faith? Your life is forming you. And the question that Leviticus asks us is, what is it forming you to become? Like, if you had one word, what is one force that currently is shaping your life? It might be one of these. It doesn't have to be, but it might be hurry or fear, generosity, comparison, gratitude, trust. It could be any one of these. But what is one word? What is one force that is present in your life that forms how you live, how you engage with your neighbor, how you show up at work? Within this book, here are 6 different ways that I think Leviticus forms the reader well. It wants to move us from performance to participation. Again, this very first verse, the Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. It asks us this question, where are you still trying to earn what God has already given to you? Leviticus wants to form us to be people of participation, not performance. Second thing, it wants us to move from this idea of grasping and receiving. Right? So these whole first 7 chapters, which really, if you were to take away the numbers that are used for the chapters, they're essentially the first couple speeches. The first 3 chapters of Leviticus is just one long speech. We have numbers because that helps us identify, but if we were reading a scroll, you would just read the first 3 chapters, and that'd be one thing, because it's one speech continually talking about receive this. Right? Life is received from God before it is returned to God. Sacrifice forms people who receive life as gift rather than try to seize life as possession. When we make sacrifice, this idea that I have to seize the thing to then offer it back to make God come to me, that misses the point of what the whole thing's trying to do. From grasping to receiving. Leviticus also wants to form us to become people who aren't trying to control everything or control our world or our relationship to God, but to approach God with reverence. Right? Leviticus 9 and 10, the story confronts the impulse to turn communion, God being with you, into something that I control or manufacture. Even more so, that book, where that chapter 10, right, Leviticus, Nadab and Abihu, is a story given to people in ministry. Right? It's not everyone gets to even have that ability. Not everyone has that chance. It's more so a warning. I think you could read it more so as a warning for if you are given a community or people to steward or shepherd, take that seriously. And don't try to manipulate or show or force God to show up in a way that God's not planning too. And that's a way to read the story. Right? So from control to reverence. This sense from hiding and blaming to confession. The Day of Atonement, the centerpiece of the book. Confession is not groveling until God becomes merciful to you. It is telling the truth because God already is merciful. Leviticus forms people who tell the truth about rupture without allowing, this is key, without allowing guilt or shame to become their permanent identity. And this is the formation that Leviticus wants to do in us. Wants us to be people who aren't hiding and blaming, to be people who really confess and then also can receive absolution. Right? Like name the thing and then don't let guilt or shame become the permanent identity that you wear. If we had more time, we would unpack how this part of the Leviticus, this thread, is just a way to revisit the Genesis story and the fall story. Also, that idea of it wants to form you from people who are trying to maximize everything, squeeze everything out of life, to be people who have margin for the sake of others. Right? Holiness leaves something at the edges so another person can live. Leviticus forms people to not consume every margin for themselves. Another level of formation, another thing this book wants to form in us. The last thing, from endless production to rest and release. Sacrifice restrains endless consumption. And then Sabbath, as a practice, takes that sacrifice idea and it restrains endless production. And then Jubilee, this year of Jubilee, this giving back, this turning back over. We don't know if it ever actually happened. But it restrains this idea of endless accumulation. Leviticus forms people who trust limits and release, control, and make restoration possible for others. I think this is key for us when we think about the aspirational way that Leviticus is sketching the world. It says, we want this year of Jubilee to be so ingrained in our hearts that we live that kind of ethic. And we can live that ethic whether it is the year or not the year. Right? So like it happens in 50 years. That's after a full generation has passed. You might not even live to see the effects of what that's doing, but can you start that now? Can you live that now? Right? A generation's 40 years, it's 50 years. So you have these movements for us. Yeah, any thoughts on those before we close with a short prayer? But so about 6 different ways to think about how the book of Leviticus wants to form us, wants to work on us. Any thoughts, reflections, and then if not, we'll close in prayer and dismiss.
I guess for me, it's like I'm looking at Sabbath restraints at endless production, and I think from a creation care standpoint, I go, we got to stop. We got to start embracing recycling things. There's no way, like a landfill, for example. And how can we be more content, with maybe not this endless production that we are so consumed with in building our economy. And I look at this and it's empowering for me, that it's coming from Leviticus, but how do we realize it?
Yeah. Thanks, Bill. Other thoughts? Thane.
I just like that idea that it's really countercultural. Like it's so easy to think like our value is based on what we produce. How many just counting things, counting followers, dollars, grants, things, whatever. And it's like very much saying.
Yeah. And that, it covers all the different times that happens in your life, right? Like Sabbath is something you're supposed to do weekly. Sacrifice is something you maybe do yearly. And then Jubilee is like the thing that goes even further. Like in all the different time frames, no matter where you fit, can this be a way that you're formed? Yeah. Well, to close, let's, if you would, stand on your feet. And let's close with this corporate prayer together as we've taken time to reflect on the Word. I always say this often. As we read the Word, we want the Word to read us. Right? We want to encounter the one that the Scriptures point us to. And it's right and good to finish in prayer. Join me. God, teach us how to live with you in the middle of our lives. Teach us to receive life as gift. Teach us to return life in worship. Teach us to share life in communion. Teach us ordinary holiness. By your Spirit, reorder our lives around your holy presence. We give ourselves to you. Amen and amen. Friends, good to be with you.